Hello and welcome back to the Food Fight Show. My name is Nathan Harvey. I'm your co-host for today. Today's episode is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to take a moment, pause, reflect, look back on 2016 and look forward into 2017. What are some of the great things that happened, maybe some of the sad things that happened in 2016, and what are we most looking forward to as we start off this new year? With me today, my co-host, Nell Shamrell. Hi, Nell. How's it going?
Hey Nathan, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to the chef community, and it's great to be here in cold Seattle.
All right. And then also with us today, we have Brandon Burton. Brandon, welcome back.
Thank you. It's been a while. Happy to be here.
It has been a while. So speaking of it being a while, I thought it might be good for us just to give a couple of quick personal updates. Like, what's everyone been up to? What have you been working on? What are you doing professionally? What are you doing socially? How's things in life for you? Brandon, maybe you can get us started. Let us know what's going on with you, bud.
Sure. So I have been at Travis CI for a year and a half now. I can't believe that it's been that long. And a little over a year ago, I took on managing the build infrastructure engineering team over there, it's a team of developers who focus on the backend services and automation around sort of all of the things related to how we run our builds and make our build environments and managing multiple public and private clouds. And so it's a pretty interesting intersection of operations and infrastructure and software engineering. Yeah, I'm really enjoying that. And it's been an interesting ride, sort of moving into focusing on management and growing in that area.
Yeah, how about keeping sort of your technical skills and chops up to date? Are you finding the time and opportunity to get in and sort of get your hands dirty with code and such?
Definitely. Travis is still a small company. We're 40-ish people now, and the team, including myself, is 6 people. So, I've still been involved in on-call rotations and responding to incidents and pairing on code and things. And so definitely there's still enough technical work and things that I keep my hands dirty, so to speak, a lot of the time.
Sweet. And Nell, how about you? What have you been up to lately?
Hello. Well, in terms of work, I am in my second year at Chef, working mainly on supermarket with the community engineering team. I've been learning Rust to hopefully contribute to Habitat in 2017, which has been fun after doing Ruby for so many years. And I do still love Ruby, but the precision of Rust is fantastic, and how precise I can be with memory in my programs. As far as personal life, I achieved my black belt rank, also known as Shodan, in the Japanese martial art Naginata. And I'll be honest, I did not pass the test the first time I took it in March, but it gave me things to work on, and I was able to pass it when I took it the second time in July, which I was very happy about. So that was the high physical point of the year. The low is I tore my shoulder in 2 places this year. So that has been a long recovery process and will continue to be. I did not realize how long it took to recover from shoulder injuries. So I have been learning quite a bit about shoulder anatomy. There's a lot more to it than I expected, and working on healing up. And that is about it for me. What about you, Nathan?
Cool. Well, the Naginata and the shoulder injury, they were unrelated. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I was in a car accident back in March.
Right. Also, I'm kind of thankful that we do this over Hangout because you might come at me with your Naginata skills, and I would not be able to myself.
The Naginata is, well, the weapons are out in the car at the moment. I need to go and get them, but that's true.
Awesome. Yeah, so for me, I've celebrated my 4th year at Chef, which is pretty incredible. I knew when I joined Chef that I wasn't smart enough and that I would have to travel too much for Chef to be a viable option for me. And I still feel the same way, but it's been super awesome to be just, a big part of this community and working at Chef with a bunch of great people. And of course, I get to work with Nell on a very regular basis, which is super awesome. And then before I talk a little bit more about sort of my year, I just wanted to remind anyone who's watching or listening in that you can join our conversation in our Chef Community Slack. You'll find that at community-slack.chef.io. So you can sign up there. There's a food fight channel within that Slack team, so you can come in there, ask questions of our panelists today, talk about whatever, suggest upcoming episodes, things along those lines. So yeah, 2016 was a very busy year for me. I spent the year kind of traveling the world, talking about Chef, talking about DevOps, and giving lots and lots of hugs. Some of the big highlights for me were, well, ChefConf for one. That's a huge conference that we run each year. That was in May in Austin, which was super fun. It was always great to get together, you know, with 1,000, 1,500 or so of our fellow community members and learn about all of the success that folks are having, talk about some of the challenges that everyone is having, and really just it's a great time to connect. It really feels much more like a family reunion to me than it does feel like a technical conference, which I think is really awesome. There's been also lots of great stuff just in terms of professional life that's been going on. The team that I work with is amazing. Chef as a company continues to grow, which is pretty awesome. So on some of the more difficult things for 2016, well, I mean, look, as a community, we're very open and inclusive and try to be very welcoming of everyone. I think it's not unfair to say that many of us in the Chef community were kind of shocked by some of the political things that happened in 2016. Certainly Brexit, the US election, the presidential election. And I think really it's a time for us to reflect as a community and think and ensure that we are in fact coming together as that welcoming, inclusive community, and looking out for our fellow neighbors, making sure that everyone feels safe and welcome, not just within the Chef community, not just safe and welcome there, but safe and welcome in their daily lives. I think that's an important thing that we need to think about as we look forward into 2017.
I told someone recently, one of the things I love most about the Chef community is we could have conversations about slightly controversial technical topics on the internet and still keep it civil. I have not seen that in any other internet community, so I'm thankful every day for that.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Cool. Why don't we, you know, as sort of this is a wrap up of 2016 and a look forward into 2017, why don't we start by just kind of talking about some of the episodes that we had for the Food Fight Show in 2016. And I'll be the first to say that 2016 was a pretty light year for the Food Fight Show. We had only 7 episodes, which is certainly fewer than we've done in previous years. But we have plans to fix that moving forward and have a lot more episodes for everyone in 2017. But we started off the year with a live recording of a Food Fight Show. Well, I mean, I guess they're all live recorded, but this was in front of a studio audience, if you will. The first episode was actually episode 97, which was at Configuration Management Camp 2016. This is an amazing conference that happens each year in Ghent. If you've not been, I can't recommend it highly enough because it's a super awesome conference. The conference itself, we bring together sort of all of the open source configuration management communities for a camp that is a mix of both keynote and sort of main track presentations, and then each of the communities ends up breaking out into a community room. The cool thing about this is that as a Chef user, you can go over to the Puppet community room and learn about some of the things that that team or that community is working on. And it turns out like we all have very similar challenges, very similar opportunities. You know, secrets management as a good example, not really a solved problem. And every single one of the configuration management communities is looking at different ways to solve for that. So that was really cool. We did do another episode that was live from a conference as well, and that was DevOps Days DFW. For me, that one was pretty cool because it was actually a combination of a number of different podcasts. Let's see, there was the Food Fight Show was represented there, Arrested DevOps was represented there, and the Software Defined Talk show with Michael Cote was there as well. That was really cool. Now I know there were a couple of other episodes. Any that stood out for you? Or
The
Anything?
main one is Habitat. I think that was one of, if not the biggest developments out of Chef this year. And it was fun to sit with a bunch of mostly highly technical people and try to figure out, all right, we know what this thing is. We have an idea what it can do. How do we define it? So that was one of my favorite episodes of 2016.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's for me been the most interesting thing that's happened in the chef world in many ways this last year.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, if you haven't heard, Habitat is a new open source project that Chef launched back in June of 2016. And it's all about application automation. So it's how do you build, deploy, and manage your applications. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, that was episode 100. I definitely recommend you go back and listen to that, and then check out the Habitat website, habitat.sh. You'll find tutorials and so forth there. We also are about to run a bunch of Habitat workshops. We have a couple coming up in Europe, actually, in the month of February. So as part of Configuration Management Camp, which happens the beginning of February, we're actually doing a Habitat workshop on the day after Configuration Management Camp in Ghent, Belgium. And then the next day, we'll be in Berlin and in Amsterdam doing Habitat workshops, so you should check those out. And I'm pretty sure there's a London one coming as well, but you can just watch chef.io/events for information on that. One other episode that I thought was pretty interesting from last year, just before we move on from that, is the episode that we did on design thinking. Mm-hmm. So that one, it has a slightly special place in my heart, if only because the Food Fight Show, like, yes, we certainly focus on Chef and DevOps is the thing that we really think about. But from time to time, we will bring in topics that have really nothing to do with Chef the technology. So design thinking was a pretty interesting episode like that. And in fact, we have at least one or two coming up in 2017 that we're already planning for. That follow that. And really, it was an opportunity for us to kind of step away and think about how do we design systems? What's a different approach for the design of those systems? So that was a lot of fun.
And I think it's so important to keep that in mind as our IT systems become ever more complex. There needs to be some underlying plan to them or design to them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I guess one other episode before we move on is that I'll mention is the InSpec episode that we did, which was episode 99. So in 2016, as we look back at Chef, it was a pretty big year for us in terms of a community and in terms of the open source projects that were sort of releasing and pushing within the community. So InSpec was a brand new open source project for us this year, or in 2016, and InSpec is all about compliance automation. So those of you that are tired of auditors coming at you or security professionals coming at you with a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet of controls, InSpec is the thing that will save you. It's the way to capture all of those compliance controls as code, and it's really a joy to work with, and certainly something that I recommend you check out. Now, have you had much chance to do anything with InSpec?
Well, I presented a talk on refactoring Terraform, and we're going to do Terraform next year. We'll cover that or a Terraform episode next year. We'll cover that in just a little bit. And I decided for the first time to use InSpec rather than ChefSpec as the test to add in before I refactor my code. And I like it a lot. It's a little different, I think, using it with Chef versus using with compliance. You can do this when you're using with plain Chef too. One of the cool things is you can assign different weights to different specs, and know that it's more of a bad thing if a certain one fails versus if another one fails. So I've played with it in that sense. It's something both compliance and InSpec, I definitely want to get my hands more into in 2017.
Yeah, that's awesome. InSpec certainly is, it's a compliance framework, but it goes really well as an integration testing framework as well. So you'll often see it used within the Chef community in two different ways. One as maybe in your test kitchen run as part of your integration tests, and then again, sort of in production as a compliance test. Yeah, for sure. Well, now why don't you give us something that happened in 2016 in the chef world, whether the chef community or chef the software. What's something that stood out for you?
Certainly. A big one that started in February of 2016 is we had our first Chef Board of Governance meeting, or the CBGB, which when Nathan told me what it was called, I asked, does that have anything to do with the heebie-jeebies? Which the answer was no. And it has been nice because that has let us collaborate with fellow chef users in different companies than us and get an idea of what real users on the ground are looking for and how we should govern not only our technology, but our community. And Nathan, you were present at those meetings, so I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about that. So we have the CBGB, the Chef Board of Governance, and in fact, as when it comes to sort of open source governance, there are kind of two different avenues that we use within the chef community or within the chef open source projects. One is, in fact, the CBGB, the Chef Board of Governors, or the Chef Board of Governance. And that board is really responsible for meeting on a semi-regular basis and then making recommendations back to chef software on how sort of the open source project should be running. And in that first meeting in February, we kind of sat down and came up with what was the mission and the goals of the CBGB, and then have started implementing those throughout the year. And it's interesting because like one of the recommendations that came out of the CBGB meeting later in the year, in the September meeting, was that contributing to docs in the chef ecosystem has become pretty burdensome. It's been very difficult to do. Mm-hmm. And sort of out of that recommendation and in parallel with that, we've actually changed a bunch of the way that chef documentation is managed on GitHub. The contribution process has gotten much easier. We've kind of simplified the code base as well, which is pretty nice. The other thing that we do, of course, within the chef community is that we actually have a set of maintainers, open source project maintainers, that's not directly related to the CBGB, but is, as Nell was saying, sort of how we work with folks outside of our coworkers. And those maintainers, we meet on a regular basis. We meet actually once a week. We talk about RFCs, or requests for comments, in the community, things that we want to make changes to around how the software works, and sometimes even how the community works. So as an example, one of the things around how the community works that came out of that RFC process was a set of community guidelines, which we've used throughout, well, since that was adopted as an RFC. We've used that within our community to sort of help ensure that we are creating, like I said at the beginning of the show, the welcoming and inclusive community that we all came to know and love within Chef.
So one of the things I'm curious about, because I totally missed it at the time, and thank you, Nell, for putting together the little like month-by-month lists in our agenda.
Sure.
The partner cookbook program, I completely missed that, and I'm curious how that's been going.
Sure. That is a special badge that certain cookbooks can get on Supermarket when they're done by a partner of Chef. So Sensu has a partner cookbook. Datadog has a partner cookbook. There are several others who have cookbooks. And what we do in Chef is those are personally vetted, both by the company that makes the cookbook and by Chef itself, as being very, very likely to work. So it's a nice way to highlight cookbooks that are coming straight from the source almost. Like you have a Datadog cookbook that's coming directly from Datadog. It's probably going to work correctly or work in the way it's intended right now. And that has been very much embraced. There's been a lot of cry for more badge-like things in Supermarket, which we will look at as we start planning out 2017 and seeing what our roadmap looks like.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that, right, is it's kind of in line with a lot of the work that Nell and others within Chef. So on the Supermarket team, we have Nell and Rob Kidd, and then over on the cookbook team, we have Tim Smith, Jennifer Davis, and Seth Thomas, also known as Cheese Plus. But these teams really are looking at how do we make it easier to find and write better cookbooks for the chef for and within the chef community. And so one of the things this partner badge program definitely helps with that. But then there's also some quality metrics that have been added to the supermarket, and that's an ongoing effort. Maybe, Nell, you could talk us through what some of those quality metrics look like today, and maybe some that are coming soon.
I'd be happy to. Two that we have that are public now is we display whether a cookbook has passed a food critic run on it. When it's uploaded to Supermarket, we take the tarball that the cookbook is within, unpack it on our remote server, and run food critic on it. And then the second one is because Supermarket is all about community, we are looking for people to have collaborators on their cookbook. Having multiple collaborators, besides getting more viewpoints, it also means if something goes wrong with the cookbook, another person can potentially upload a fixed version of it. So for that one, we expect someone to have, I think it's at least 2 collaborators on any cookbook. And then those are the 2 that are public right now. We have a few that are currently admin only Supermarket admins can see it because we're evaluating their effectiveness. But one of them is making sure that a cookbook is not deprecated and is not up for adoption. When people are looking for a cookbook to use, using a deprecated one or using one that's up for adoption usually is not in their best interest. So we want to make sure we highlight the cookbooks that are not in either of those states. And then another one we have is any good open source project should have a license. And there are a few specific licenses that, I mean, you can release a cookbook to Supermarket with no license if you want to, or I think almost any license. But the ones that we endorse are Apache, MIT, and there's a couple of other ones as well. So our GPL, so we currently have a metric that examines whether a cookbook has one of those licenses defined on it. And if it does, great, it passes that metric. If it doesn't, we suggest which ones the author should consider using with the cookbook on the Supermarket. And there's a few more that'll be coming in the near future, including supported platforms and others. And the best thing about I'm going to do that again. The best thing about putting together these quality metrics is we engage the community in doing so. We have a special GitHub repo where people can suggest certain metrics which might be good for determining whether a cookbook is of quality. And that kind of collaboration with the community has been my favorite part of this entire project. So we will put the URL in the show notes. And if you are listening live, Nathan just put it in the Food Fight room of the Chef Community Slack, and let's continue collaborating into 2017.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see some of these metrics come out. I think it really helps. As we continue to look forward, let's look back. Let's look a little bit forward beyond February in the year, and let's jump to June and talk a little bit more about Habitat. So we mentioned it earlier that Habitat was launched in June. It really was a big change for us at Chef. It's completely different than Chef. Brandon, I don't know if you've had any chance to look at Habitat, but if you have, I'd love to hear sort of reactions.
Not much beyond participating in the podcast last year and then just seeing tweets and stuff. But you know, my kind of reactions back when it was launched, and just I thought it was a really bold move in some ways. You know, especially like following on, you know, right? Once upon a time there was Ops Code, and then there was this rebrand to Chef because it was the company was known for. So then to sort of continue to evolve with a new with this new set of tools that in many ways is acknowledging the shift in how applications are deployed and thinking about it, and you know, coming along with other things like cloud and microservices, right? All these changes. So I thought it was you know, bold in some ways, but very smart and forward thinking, and it's just really cool to see it happen. I'd definitely be interested to hear a little bit about how the adoption of it has gone. It's been, you know, what, about 6 months now. It's been sort of out there for people to use.
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to that a little bit. I've been doing a number of sort of Habitat workshops or hack days, if you will, where we get together with some folks in the community, and you know, sometimes it's folks that have used Habitat before, sometimes it's folks that haven't used it at all. I've also done quite a bit of Habitat training, and so I think the general reaction that we see within the community is not dissimilar to what you just said there, Brandon. It's a bold, big, forward-thinking move from Chef, which is pretty awesome to see. I think that some of the things that we're starting to see as people are using it more and more often is, well, there are a couple of quick themes that I'll point out there. One, I was talking recently with a customer who a while back had decided to move everything over to containers and started doing a bunch of stuff with Kubernetes. And they were being pretty successful with that. But when Habitat came out, they saw that and looked at it and realized that Habitat was going to be a way for them to build better Docker containers that they could then run in Kubernetes, and sort of that build process and the process by which the developers created those containers was a bit streamlined and was much easier, and resulted in much better containers, much smaller containers also. So they've started adopting Habitat as their primary build tool. Another customer that we were working with recently is a longtime Chef customer who's built out a bunch of pipelines with Chef Workflow through Chef Automate, and have done a lot of stuff with Chef Provisioning and so forth, and wanted to start managing I think it was an Elasticsearch, an Elk Stack, with containers, and sort of manage that in a more modern way, if you will. And so we sat down, our engineering team sat down with them for a week or so, and built out Habitat for their Elk Stack. And it was really incredible to watch sort of the evolution of that. We saw a number of things happen. First, their pipeline became much more simple. Their cookbooks for deploying their infrastructure were greatly simplified. And then at the end, they were able to actually, in the time that they allotted, they were able to accomplish a number of their stretch goals, which included things like Sensu monitoring of their Elk Stack and things like that. So I think that we're still relatively early days, right? It's still a pretty young piece of software. It's been out for 6 months, but we are really starting to see some enterprises, some startups, some real adoption of the technology. And over the next year, we're going to continue to go out around the world, online and so forth, and try to get folks spun up on, ramped up on how to use the technology, and really excited about it. Now, I think you've played around some with Habitat.
I have indeed. I have a talk coming up in February at Microsoft Ignite Australia, and the technology behind the talk is still in process, but the idea is through that talk, I will demonstrate creating a Habitat artifact on a Linux system in a Linux container that can be deployed to Docker, and then on that same Linux system also creating one that can be deployed to a Windows container. Now that functionality has not been released in Habitat yet, that's still in the works, but I think once that's completed, that'll help really show the value of Habitat. One of the key things we've seen throughout 2016 since the Habitat launch, it's not so much that we need to be tight about our messaging on Habitat, though we do. It's that it really takes someone physically, I think, packaging something with Habitat, deploying it, and then seeing the way the Habitat supervisor makes it so they can deploy that package to multiple containers or multiple VMs, and then have all those containers or VMs self-organize into each other. That's the real genius of Habitat. At first, it felt a little bit like, if you saw the last episode of Silicon Valley, one of the issues they ran into was their product was great, but it took 20 minutes to explain it. I think that's where we were at the very beginning of the launch. I think now we are showing through all those Habitat workshops and Habitat hack days where the value of it is. Something else I wanted to say was, I remember on Twitter on launch day, someone tweeted at Adam Jacob and said, well, aren't you deprecating Chef? Aren't you deprecating yourself? And so before I go into this, number one, that's a long way off. But number two, I liked Adam's response, which was, that's what a company should do. I mean, if we don't innovate, if we don't disrupt ourselves, to use one of the ultimate buzzwords, someone else is going to do it. So this is a bold, I don't want to say new direction for Chef. It's a parallel direction right now, I think. But I think we're going to see them working together more and more throughout 2017.
Yeah, I was just in just on a call, actually right before this episode was started, where we were talking about are we going to cannibalize sort of our customers or community if we get them over to Habitat? And frankly, the answer is that Habitat makes things like deploying applications much simpler with Chef. Deploying applications without something like Habitat or a good packaging answer for your applications can be quite difficult in Chef, and certainly there are many places that are doing it and doing it successfully. But when you look at that Chef code, it's much more complex than is necessarily required when you start to adopt things like Habitat. So maybe just moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sort of the ins and outs, sort of day-to-day lives of contributors to Chef and community members to Chef, because I think that's changed quite significantly in 2016. Something as simple, or maybe not so simple, but something like the way we communicate took a big change. In fact, we moved from IRC as one of our primary ways that the community connected over to Slack, and I think that's gone quite well. Now, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
On the move to Slack?
Yeah.
It's been useful. I mean, there was a lot of discussion over whether that would be putting more barrier to entry to people who want to communicate with the community, but I think our ultimate decision was it was a little less, because fluency in IRC, people who are newer to, not even newer to the developer, but I mean, it's not used as much lately, whereas Slack, it's the tool it seems like everybody's using right now. It's easy to have the channel open or the team open with your other teams in your Slack app on your computer. I think it's gone very well.
Brandon, you've been pretty active in the Hangouts community for, well, since forever, as long as that community's been around. And I know that there was I believe there was some IRC in the Hangouts community, but now there is a Slack channel for that as well. What's been your experience with the differences between IRC and Slack, and migration between the two?
So yeah, the IRC channel really early on saw some usage, but it was never a huge thing. And then I honestly can't even remember what prompted making a Slack team for it instead. It might have been like Twitter integration or something instead of needing to run a bot. It was something like that. I think maybe I just wasn't using Slack at work at the time and wanted an excuse to use Slack. And it just took off. In fact, it's fairly equivalent to an IRC network in itself in terms of scope. Something where people started, making channels for all these different topics, and that became very popular. And I think like there's a HashiCorp channel that became a really popular place for community members to get help, and it exploded. And along the way, I would start getting people, being like, "Hey, is it cool if I make a channel for, my the DevOps Austin, Texas meetup or whatever?" And at some point, I just opened it up to where people could just create whatever channels they wanted, and added a few more people as admins to help with just if there were interpersonal challenges or things like that, or behavior things that did need some input from someone with that sort of admin level authority. And yeah, it's kind of exploded into this thing that is far beyond what I ever imagined it would be. And I honestly haven't been super active on there in the last even couple of years. And part of that I think too is we use Slack at Travis, and that's busy enough. It's the Hangout Slack is so busy, but when I look at it, it's there's 3,800 members, and when I check in, there's somewhere between 700 and 1,000 people active most days. So it's become a pretty huge thing off on its own. And
yeah, and you mentioned channels there. I just took a look. It looks like there's 250 or more channels, or right around 250 over in Hangouts, it's pretty cool. It's great. I think Slack is an interesting tool to really provide easy access for the community, the broad community, to chat with each other, connect with each other, and so forth. And I think it also, there's a testament to Slack itself in that how many teams do each of us belong to? I know that I think I'm up to 15 Slack teams right now, which of course is way more than anyone can probably actually keep in their head, like can use effectively. But there's all these connections that I have across many different communities.
I think I have 10 on my current computer, and I just took a look at Hangouts and noticed in the main Hangouts channel there's 3,862 people at the moment, and it just reminds me occasionally what will happen is someone will do an @here or @channel by accident in that main channel, which of course other people start responding with @here, and I called it a here storm, which is a very kind of Slack unique sort of thing, I think, that happens from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, that's we certainly in the days of active IRC usage, there are certainly people that are relatively new to IRC, or there's a certain etiquette that oftentimes goes unspoken, and the way that you learn about that etiquette usually is by making a misstep or witnessing someone else make a misstep. So yeah, that can definitely be a challenge. Some other things that changed, though, in the sort of open source world around Chef was we got rid of the CLA, the contributor license agreement. That thing is gone. Wow, that was a big move. So
yep.
Go ahead, Nell. Maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was a bit on the front lines of that. So originally, we had two contributor CLAs, contributor license agreements, one for individuals and one for corporations. And we had a way that people could sign up, sign them using the supermarket website, but a lot of corporations with legal departments preferred to still manually fax them in. So they would fax them in, and then we'd have to manually add them to supermarket so that all the GitHub hooks and such would pick up that a certain person on GitHub had signed the CLA. This was not easy to manage, and broke, I wouldn't say frequently, but broke enough that it was very painful to fix it each time. So what we switched to is DCO, or Developer Certificate of Origin. And what that means is we have people sign their commits when they sign to them, saying they agree to the Apache 2 license for that commit. And we had a lot of good discussion, I think, over whether this would kind of break workflow for people who are newer to Git. You can add it if you're using Git on the command line through the /s tag, or there's other ways you can add it in after the effect, but and it was good, for good reasons. People brought up, what about people who use Git in a graphic, a GUI for Git? Are they going to be able to add in that signature there, or what are their options for it? So it's, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's the most controversial thing we've done, but it was up there. But I think it was done in a way, and the final decision was made after hearing all this inputs, that everyone knew all their input had been heard, it had been evaluated, and these were the reasons we were making the decision to go forward with DCO.
Yeah, there was certainly a long and pretty heated at times discussion around that move, which was really, I think it was interesting to watch. It was interesting certainly to be a part of, and I think it led to a really good outcome now.
Well, should we talk about our conferences, ChefConf and the community summits?
Yeah, I mean, those were pretty incredible this year. We did hold ChefConf in July in Austin. We held 2 community summits, one in Seattle and one in London. Now, I know that you participated in both ChefConf and the Seattle summit. What were your big takeaways?
One of them at ChefConf, one of the keynote speakers, her first name was Rachel, I think. I can't remember her last name, from GE. What I liked in her presentation and in the interview afterward was how she emphasized GE uses Chef not to go slowly, but to go very carefully. She came from a military background where if you don't have that built-in quality control, I mean, lives are literally on the line. And with what GE does, many of their industries and products, I can see that need for quality. So it was nice to see her highlight how Chef helps them achieve that level of quality in a way that they can still be innovative. As far as the summit goes, Seattle Community Summit, this is my third Seattle Community Summit, and it was odd because at this one I was referred to as a grizzled veteran after being with Chef for 2 years, which I took it as a compliment. And it's always, I mean, it's just like online. It's always fun for me to see how we can have those discussions that might get a little heated but are still respectful, and come out with a good outcome, which maybe not everyone will agree with, but know that they were heard. And the hugs are always nice. Aaron Kalin always has his tail, and it's a good time all around. Nathan, I know you were at the London Summit. What was that one like?
Yeah, the London Summit was pretty awesome. Just before I go there, it was Rachel Trombetta from GE Digital.
Thank you.
If you're in the if you're in the Slack right now, I've just posted a link to the YouTube of her presentation, but we'll definitely include that in the show notes as well. But so back to summits, the London Summit was really great. The Seattle Summit was 2 days of open spaces. The London Summit, we actually did it a little bit differently, where we had the mornings was presentations, and some of those presentations were from Chef, but a good number of them also were from customers. And what we really kind of looked for from our customers that we invited to speak there were those that could tell the story of their adoption of Chef, but also to demo some of the things that they've actually been doing. So that went really well. We did that in the morning, and then the afternoon was in fact open spaces. So it was a really nice mix of sort of prepared content to sort of get you in the mood, get you thinking about the things around Chef, and that kind of set it up really nicely for the open spaces in the afternoon, and we ended up with lots of great conversations. You mentioned hugs, and I think it would be I would be remiss if I didn't mention that hugging is like sometimes, and for some people in the U.S., it can be a little bit awkward. Certainly in a professional setting to get a hug. Well, if you think it's awkward here, take that to London and into the UK, and it gets a lot more awkward. So actually, last year at the London Summit, we had an RFC around the proper etiquette for hugging within the Chef community. So we actually, I think perhaps at both community summits this year, we acted it out that so that we could demonstrate what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. How do you signal if you're not interested or not up for a hug, which is always it's fun, it's funny, but it's also it's a legit thing. I don't think it's wise or safe to assume that anyone that you meet on the street or at an event is someone who's willing to receive a hug from you.
I absolutely agree. And along with the personal space issues, the shoulder issue reminded me, particularly over the holidays, how much I like being asked if I want to hug first, or being, having someone indicate they want to give me a hug, and I can shake my head or nod my head, depending on how I'm feeling at that point.
Now, Brandon, you weren't at any of the conferences, were you?
No, one of the things that I did this last year, 2016, was try to go to some new communities in terms of conferences. I went to PyCon in June of last year. That was in Portland. That was interesting. Went to HashiConf, which is kind of interesting, right? It's like been very relevant to the tools that we're using it for a lot of stuff at Travis and my team. So yeah, it was kind of interesting to get out into some other communities.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's important that we all do that, right?
So on the hugs topic, it's interesting. We even within Slack at Travis, we sort of have we have a lot of things based around emoji reaction, sort of etiquette. But one of them is there's a set of emojis where one of them is like hugs maybe, and it's like a little hug with a question mark. And there's like hugs yes, hugs no, hugs always. Like there's a few kind of like that. Just even like it's like kind of a way to like, you know, be like, hey, you know, someone expresses maybe some difficult emotion, like kind of a way to show support or solidarity in a way that, you know, gives the person a chance to sort of express what level of like response or interaction they're looking for. And it's one of those little things that seems to work really well. So it's really cool to have done that in the physical space as well for Chef.
Right. Moving to Slack has been an adventure in learning emojis and learning the context behind them. I'm in another Slack, and for I think a couple of days, we're discussing the dancing penguin emoji, which is one of my favorites, and what it really means. Does this mean delight? Does this mean love? And it's been nice to see. Occasionally in the Chef internal Slack, and I see this in external Slacks too, something will come up like Sue Choi is one of our directors of business development at Chef, and I saw someone put an emoji for Sue, and it was a yurt. So I messaged her. I said, "Why are you a yurt?" And there's little inside jokes like that, but it's fun.
That's really awesome. All right, well, we're starting to get tight on time here, so why don't we look forward? Let's look ahead and talk about 2017. First, I have some pretty good news on the Food Fight Show front. We already have a bunch of episodes that we're planning out, even some with dates associated with them. So it looks like we'll at least get off to a good start here. So at the end of this month, on January 24th, we're going to do an episode with the sous chefs. Now, you may or may not have heard of the sous chefs. They've been around actually for a number of years. Their previous name was the Chef Brigade, so maybe that name sounds familiar to you, but perhaps not. In any case, the sous chefs is a number of members of the chef community who are taking it upon themselves to sort of adopt cookbooks that may have otherwise been abandoned by their maintainer or contributors. Maybe you contributed a cookbook to the supermarket, and then over time you're no longer working with that technology, you've moved on to a different job or something like that, and that cookbook can kind of just rot, have bit rot. And so the sous chefs are a team of community organized individuals that will come in and pick up that cookbook. And so we'll talk with them about stuff. We also have an episode that we're planning for the end of February on A3 thinking. So again, back to the idea that it's not always about chef, but other things in our space that's interesting. That's coming up. Nell, you're going pretty far away to give us a show, right?
I am. I'm going to be at Microsoft Ignite in Australia. I'll be giving a talk on Habitat, but also I'm planning on doing a live show from Down Under. So that will be a new adventure. I don't know if we'll be able to live broadcast that one. It'll depend on the Wi-Fi at the event, like all conferences. It depends on the Wi-Fi. But if not, we'll definitely record it and then get that released. So I'm looking forward to hearing Australian perspectives on Chef and Microsoft, and on what we do.
That's awesome. Other episodes that we have coming up, I'll be back at Configuration Management Camp again at the beginning of February, so we'll do a wrap-up episode there just to kind of cover everything that happened at that conference. And then we're also planning an episode on Terraform, as well as an episode on AWS OpsWorks. So OpsWorks actually was a big announcement that Chef and Amazon had at the end of 2016. And OpsWorks, as you may know, is an Amazon version of Chef, and in fact in December we announced that Amazon's OpsWorks is really all of Chef Automate now. So it's a much more comprehensive offering that gets you much closer to the full capabilities of Chef through OpsWorks. So we'll have a show all about discussing that. But what other shows do you want to hear? We'd love to hear feedback from you. You can tweet us at Food Fight Show. You can drop into the Chef community Slack at community-slack.chef.io. Drop into the Food Fight channel there. Let us know what episodes, what topics, what things you'd like to discuss. So let's see. Any predictions? What do you think is going to happen in 2017? What do you hope is going to happen in 2017? Nell, why don't we go to you first?
Sure. In terms of Chef, one of the things Barry, our CEO, emphasized at the Seattle Community Summit is 2017 is going to be focused much more on refining the products that we have and making them better. There were a lot of new products launches back in 2016. And I'm glad we did those, but it'll be nice to focus on that refining element of our craft. So I am looking forward to that. Personally, I'm hoping by this time next year to have a completely healed shoulder. And what about you, Brandon?
Honestly, I got nothing.
That's okay.
Yeah, this is the one part I'm just kind of like. So.
There you go. Will you be at Scale, Brandon?
Yeah, I should definitely be there. And yeah, I think even a couple people from my team are looking at submitting talks. So hopefully there might be a nice little Travis presence.
Awesome. So if you don't know, that's the Southern California Linux Expo. You should definitely check that out because that's a great conference.
I think that's early March this year, Pasadena.
Yeah, I think so. Like the 3rd through the 5th or something, if like my brain is working. In terms of me for looking forward to 2017, I'm looking forward to another great Chef Conf. And I'm looking forward to more regular Food Fight Show episodes. So I want to personally and publicly thank Nell. She's actually been the driving force that's poking me, saying, hey, let's get these back on the schedule. Let's start doing these on a regular basis again. So thank you, Nell, and I think we're off to a great start.
You're very welcome. Can't wait to record more in 2017.
Awesome. All right, well, we have just about 10 minutes left, so let's move on to our picks. For those of you that are actually, you know what? I'm going to hold off on the picks because I want to just mention a couple of things that I meant to mention at the top of the show, but I didn't. And those are some events that we have coming up very soon in the chef community that you might be interested in. So actually, next week, which maybe is already in the past, depending on when you're listening to this, on January 10th, there's a Seattle Chef meetup that's happening. Actually, that week, most of Chef employees will be in Seattle for sort of a big all-hands company meeting that's happening all week long. And Tuesday night, which is January 10th, we're going to host a game night at our headquarters. So it's a meetup. It's a meetup in air quotes, if you will, because we aren't really going to talk a whole lot of tech, but we're going to play some awesome games. There might be some Dungeons and Dragons happening, some exploding kittens, who knows? But if you're in the Seattle area at all, please stop by that evening. Other things
Absolutely.
we have, yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Other things we have coming up include, well, I'll be speaking at the DevOps Remote Conference. That's January 18th and 19th, so I'm going to talk about DevOps there. We have a Microsoft Azure on Chef workshop coming up. That's January 24th. Chef on Azure DevOps and Automation workshop in Portland, Oregon on January 25th. A Guildford DevOps meetup, that's over in the UK. That's January 25th as well. And then we move into February where we have a webinar on building custom OHI plugins, configuration management camp, which I've mentioned a couple of times here. And then a couple of Habitat workshops that are following that up. Hands-on with Habitat in Berlin, a Habitat workshop immediately following Configuration Management Camp, hands-on with Habitat in Amsterdam, and then we're into Microsoft Ignite down in Australia with Nell. The thing that's also happening in February, the last thing I'll mention on this episode, is the Won't Fix Cabal. This is a new conference. It's a new unconference for open source maintainers. So if you're an open source maintainer or maybe even an open source contributor, I would recommend checking this out. It's February 15th at the GitHub headquarters. Chef is sponsoring this. I know a number of folks from my team will be there, a number of contributors from Chef. I may be there myself if I can work it into my schedule. So, all right, those are the upcoming events that I wanted to cover. Let's now move on to the picks. This is the point where each of our panelists can share something that they're really excited about and think that you should know about. So now, why don't we go to you first?
Certainly. My first pick is the Star Wars Commander game for iOS. I think it might be out for Android too, though I'm not certain off the top of my head. And what it is it's, loosely you'd say it's Clash of Clans set in the Star Wars world, but it feels so much more refined and so much better, and there's a lot of strategy involved with it. So I recommend that one. I always turn in-app purchases off. So if I do decide to purchase something, I really have to think about it beforehand because I think it could be easy to spend a lot of money. And then my second pick is Top Chef Season 13. I do not have cable at my apartment, so I watch cable shows when they come out on Hulu. And that season just came out recently on Hulu, and it's fun. And one of the things they highlight is we have 10 years of Top Chef, which is a show I've watched from the beginning. I take a lot of inspiration in my own cooking. And now that I work at a company called Chef, it feels even more connected.
That's awesome. My wife and I are also big Top Chef fans. In fact, there are a number of Top Chef contestants and finalists that have restaurants in LA.
Awesome.
So if you ever come down here, you can add that to your list of things to do. My wife and I went to one a couple weeks ago. It was really good.
Would love to.
So, yeah. Nathan, do you want to go through your picks?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So one of my picks is a general pick is DevOps Days conferences. If you've never been to a DevOps Days conference, please try to make it part of your resolution for 2017 to get out to a DevOps Day conference. Now, a little bit more specifically, I'd like to call out DevOps Days Baltimore, which is coming up in March. The CFP has closed, so you can't submit a talk, but tickets are still available. This is the first time that a DevOps Days is being held in Baltimore, and for me, frankly, at the first time a DevOps Days is held in a location is a special time. That's a special event, and I think it's well worth attending. So I hope to see you in Baltimore in March. Go to devopsdays.org to find out when and where a DevOps Days is happening near you. Now, the other thing that I'll take as a pick is, I've talked a lot about Chef Conf, but so the thing I wanted to mention about Chef Conf as a pick is the call for presenters is currently open. That CFP is open until January 18th. We are really looking for stories from all different levels of experience with Chef, all different levels of experience and success and failure with DevOps and sort of transforming and becoming a high velocity organization. We want to hear all of those things. You may be thinking that your story isn't worth telling or worth sharing at a conference. I just want to, frankly, I want to call bullshit on that. Your story is worth sharing. There are many in the community who would love to hear it. So please do submit a talk for ChefConf. You can do that at chefconf.com. So those are my picks, DevOps Days and ChefConf, and get in your talk proposals for ChefConf, and then maybe for a DevOps Days coming near you too. Brandon, how about you for final set of picks?
Definitely. So I had to think long and hard to come up with some picks, but I went with a couple things that are now have proven to be multi-year things. They are the AWS Advent and SysAdvent. For anyone not familiar, these are sort of a 24 days of blog post events that are organized. SysAdvent originally was started by Jordan Cecil, of Logstash fame, and now is run and curated by Chris Weber, another excellent person at Chef. And I believe SysAdvent was in its 7th or 8th year this year. AWS Advent came back this year. And I want to give a huge thanks to Jennifer Davis for prompting me to make that happen, and then really driving most of it, even in the midst of having a baby. She really got that off and going. And Seth Davis and Sonka Rumpler also sort of jumped in and really helped drive that, as well as there were numerous editor and author contributors. So it was really cool to see the AWS Advent happen again this year. And with fairly minimal involvement required on my part, mostly just like buying the domain and helping with the hosting. So it was really cool to see that happen and AWS Advent happen. In particular, one post that I picked was from SysAdvent. It was the Day 6 post by Alice Goldfuss. She works over at New Relic, and it was called "No More On-Call Murders," and it was a really great post. I thought on really like what I think of as like, best thinking, current best thinking around on-call and how to make it more, healthy and approachable and scalable, because it is one of the things that comes with all, operating all these computers that we're now operating at scale. And so it was a really good post that I'd encourage anyone who, is involved in any kind of operations or on-call rotation to check out and check out both of those things in general, because you've got, what is that, 48 awesome technical blog posts across a lot of topics.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned Jennifer Davis, and she just had a baby recently. It's her first baby, so congratulations to Jennifer.
And she also wrote a book this year. Well,
Yeah.
the book came out this year.
That's right. That's right. She's been on a delivery kick, I guess. Shipping books, shipping babies. It's awesome. So hello to Frankie, little Frankie, and congratulations to Jennifer. What a great little family there. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode. And until next time, chefs, keep it hot.